I've got John Matisonn with me, who's an author, political journalist, and a former senior UN official to discuss what happened in the White House and what is the aftermath. What can we expect? Hi, John. So nice to see you.
For you, Linda.
Yeah, we go back a long way to, was it Cadessa?
Yeah.
So you had some really inside info into what happened at that lunch after the meeting between President Cyril Ramaphosa and President Donald Trump in the White House. So what is your takeaways from that?
Well, it's fascinating because Trump and his people behaved completely differently behind the scenes. Uh, 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 One of the people I spoke to described him as having a great sense of humor, charming, warm, hospitable. He very courteous, very engaged. He said he has an encyclopedic knowledge of golf. He would mention one of the golfers who was there at the lunch, that in 1997 you used this club on this green to win this contest. Uh, and so he was very animated, went on much longer than expected, and it was all friendly. And I've spoken to two different people who were there and who are very different in their political backgrounds, and they both said the same thing. The tone was excellent. It was very constructive. President Trump said, "We have to have a relationship with South Africa. We cannot not have trade with you." Of course, the U.S. must be involved with the G20. He said we'll be there. Now, since then, there's some question marks, and we'll see. And as you know, with Trump, anything can happen later. But the meeting itself, behind closed doors, was very, very different from the public confrontation and very friendly.
The German Chancellor is next in line to see President Trump. So could President Ramaphosa give him some tips?
Yes, the German Chancellor Merz, I think he's meeting today, and he called Ramaphosa this week to ask for advice. Because everybody is seeing it now. You had the Zelenskyy meeting and the Ramaphosa meeting. So it's starting to look more like the problem isn't the visitors.
So what kind of reception do you think he will have at
I think
the White House?
a positive one. I think also because, Trump's political situation is getting more complicated now, as we can all see. He's had this enormous power the last couple of months. Since January the 20th, he's been able to do what he liked. But quite a few things are starting to get tricky in Washington for him. So I don't think he wants a fight with Merz. Although I think what we've seen in both the Zelenskyy meeting and the Ramaphosa meeting, if somebody crosses him, if someone says something that annoys him, he blows up.
Reports from South Africa is that there's a view that Ramaphosa has stalled now, that it looked as though he's going to do some things. Is that your perception?
Well, the problem with Ramaphosa always is that he doesn't follow through. He doesn't implement. He doesn't drive a reform. He makes, I thought Cyril's performance in the meeting in the Oval Office was outstanding. I think he handled himself charmingly. He was sophisticated, suave, and so on, and quick on his feet. But that's his strength. His weakness is governing, getting things done. It goes back into the soup of the ANC caucus meeting and the NEC and the cabinet and battles behind the scene and the tripartite alliance. And so I think no, I think they have been slightly sobered by the meeting in Washington, because it was the first time they were forced to face the fact that that they can't just ignore people. I mean, I've had before the Trump administration, I've had several very senior U.S. diplomats say to me privately, we fund something like PEPFAR, which is billions of dollars for AIDS in South Africa, and some of the other programs and research and so on. And when we want to meet with a minister on that very program, we can't get a meeting. So, and by the way, other ambassadors, even the Chinese ambassadors, complained that he sometimes has trouble getting meetings. I think that was particularly bad under Naledi Pandor. So hopefully it'll get better under Ronald Lamola. I was slightly heartened when he came out of that meeting. I got the feeling, and at this stage it's hard to be sure, that, Ronald Lamola is a younger guy. He's just come into the job. He's learning on the job. And this whole experience of Trump and the Washington trip did have an effect on him, which I hope it did.
Well, as somebody from the US pointed out to me, he was like the one in front at that case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. So might there have been a rethink on his side?
Not on the ICJ. I think the ICJ is baked in for political reasons, for the ANC, historical reasons. I mean, frankly, in the election last year, the ANC had very little to run on. They couldn't run on the success of South Africa because it's not successful. So, but they had to rile up emotionally, gin up their base, and they did it mostly on the Palestinian issue. So, and it's sort of in their DNA. It's something they've done. ANC has done historically. So I actually don't think that's particularly movable with the ANC, but other things might be.
So what would be movable, do you think? There's a little bit about Starlink possibly, being allowed in South Africa. What do you think is going to happen? What else?
Yes, well, I've been talking to the Minister of Communications, who's a DA, of course, Sali Malatsi, and he has started the process of reform of Starlink, of the process that would allow for Starlink to be licensed in South Africa. And the big benefit of that is in the rural areas. It's not the cheapest system, but it gets to areas that others don't. But even there, what the media haven't picked up on is that it's going to take time. It's probably 2 years before the process that the minister has started gets to a point that you have a decision, you have license terms, you have license hearings, you have licenses awarded, and so on. So it's not imminent or anything. But the principle is a step forward, that it doesn't have to be 30% black ownership for Starlink in South Africa. They can do something different, which is an equivalence program.
So what else do you want South Africa to do? What do you think they will do?
Well, you see, the interesting thing is, in the closed door meeting, there was no discussion. There's a whole lobby in South Africa that believes that Trump was going to, hold the South Africans by the scruff of the neck and tell them to abolish a lot of domestic policies and change them. None of that happened in the meeting. None of it at all. They discussed other matters. They discussed critical minerals, and trade deals. Trump and Musk would like to get American cars into South Africa without tariffs. And as you know, our tariffs on imported cars are very, very high. So that's a legitimate issue for the Americans to raise, although, we have our argument about it too. So they discussed those things, but they did not discuss domestic policies. So I don't see much of that coming from the Trump administration. But as you know, there is a lobby that really thinks this is imminent, and that the South Africans were taken to the cleaners and read the Riot Act. And of course, they were humiliated in public in the Oval Office. There's no doubt about that. But I don't know that is changed right now. I see no sign other than that humiliation in public, that they really have a plan, that Cyril is really studying our politics and our domestic policies. You may have seen some of the interviews. People said, don't think Trump doesn't know what he's doing. He's got all the intelligence services. He knows exactly what's going on in South Africa, and he's going to read the Riot Act to them. And what did we find? I mean, if you looked at the documents that Trump presented in the Oval Office, they haven't gone through the intelligence agencies. I mean, I lived in Washington a long time. I'm sort of familiar with the establishment, the administration there. The intelligence services and the State Department would never have allowed those through, because they would know that there was better evidence they could have produced. But to show a picture of Julius Malema, of the economic freedom fighters, and say this is one of your officials, I mean, that is a rookie error. And so, of course, Johnny Sienazen could say that's the guy we're trying to keep out of office. He was chucked out of the ANC. He's not an official. He's not in government. And then, of course, the picture of the DRC bodies in the Congo, which he said was South Africa. The intelligence services would have stopped that. The State Department would have stopped it. So they never saw it. All that stuff was stuff Trump got in the White House, almost certainly from Elon Musk and his other contacts, and it wasn't checked and verified. And then, of course, Trump made a point of stopping at the crosses and saying those cars are all stopped there to mourn those people. And the real story was, I mean, it's a terrible story. Killings of farmers are terrible, but it's not a white genocide. And that particular event was a non-racial event. They were mourning black and white farmers and farm workers. And Trump also said they never got. No, you do nothing about it. And we all know crime is a serious problem in South Africa, and often they do nothing about it. But in that case, they found the culprits. 3 people were arrested, charged, convicted of murder, and given life sentences. So, he just used bad examples. So he's not on top of it as much as this lobby of people saying that Trump is all-knowing and all-seeing.
So you said in your article that South Africa needed a jolt. So did they get the message?
Well, as I say, I think they did get a jolt. But our government is very weak. It's the people. You and I cover new Mandela and Sisulu and Governor Mbeki and Joe Slovo and Palo Jordan. I mean, these people, they were not equipped to govern a sophisticated society, but they were quality people. They were exceptionally smart and thoughtful and strategic. Who would you say in our cabinet is like that now? It's very, very little, very thin on the ground. And so the degree to which the government can fix itself is really the question.
You said that sometimes foreign officials battle to get meetings with South African officials. So is that a big problem that there's no ambassador in Washington?
Well, if the only thing we didn't have was an ambassador in Washington, that's one thing. But as you probably know, the ambassador there was sick for a long time and they didn't replace him. I mean, if you run it, Washington, things move fast there, and there's enormous power on the streets of Washington. You don't leave it unarmed by an ambassador. And when you appoint one, you think through the consequences so that you don't get him PNG'd, declared persona non grata. So if it was just the ambassador, I'd be less worried. But what worries me is, where are the driving forces in this government? I think the opposite. I think the cabinet is generally of higher quality than the last one, and even the ANC ministers, are better than the previous ones. A police minister today is Senzo Chunu. He's much better than Chancellor, his predecessor was. And the DA people are, making progress, but we're not seeing the reforms which I wrote in my last book, Cyril's Choices, an agenda for reform. There are obvious things that can be done. The business community, other authors have the think tanks have all come with obvious issues that and South Africa moves very slowly. I mean, I read today that the Minister of Transport is making some headway on privatizing rail lines, and that's that. Do you know that there are billions of rands on standby to be invested in that? That investment is ready to take place, and the government took a policy on it under the ANC government before the election last year. It's about 2-3 years ago, but there's no urgency. So now they're moving on it. But even that, it's not a quick process. So there is movement, but it's way too slow. And I think the public is getting fed up. I think the public's getting impatient. The business community, other groups are getting tired of it. And as you see, I mean, on the podcasts and the whole YouTube world, it's getting more and more aggressive from all sides.
Well, if we look at Ramaphosa, there is a suggestion that he is inaction or he's stalling is because he is scared of a knock on the door from Mashatile. And if I look at Paul Mashatile's overseas program, which I get on the government communications network, I mean, he's in Japan, then he's in France. I mean, he is on public platforms every single day. So is that a real threat? Is that why Ramaphosa is stalling?
I wish you could blame it all on one person or one situation. But the truth is, I was always very favorably disposed towards Cyril Ramaphosa. I wanted him to be president after Mandela, just like Mandela did, rather than Thabo Mbeki. But the truth is, he's been a terrible disappointment because since he's been in power, what we have seen is his inability to get things done. And now I'm fully aware that there are many political obstacles. It's not just Paul Mashatile. Anything you want to do, the lobbies, the factions within the ANC will resist many things that need to be done. But as a president, well, I learned this in Washington. As a president, there are things you can do that are not that high profile and that will produce results, where you'll either do it without notice or with minimum pushback so that you can manage as a president. And what disappointed me so much about Cyril Ramaphosa is that he didn't do those things. So he's been in office 8 years, and he's got precious little to show for it in terms of real reform.
Both of you and I remember Mandela. Sometimes he just went against the ANC just to do the right thing.
Lead from the front, of course.
Well, take the hard decisions.
Yes, yes. Oh, absolutely. We need decisions made. We need act and follow through. I mean, one of my bugbears, because I was in government under Mandela, involved in broadcast in the information economy. Our digital migration. The process was set up in 2002. The United Nations International Telecommunications Union set a deadline for all of us of 2015. Most African countries met that. Namibia, others, they often use South African engineers to do it. South Africa still hasn't finished digital migration. That would free up frequencies to give us faster, cheaper Wi-Fi. That is gold. There is research that shows, and I've seen this even when I wrote my first book, that's 10 years ago. The research was clear as daylight that you can create hundreds of thousands of new jobs just by getting cheaper, faster, more efficient internet. And he didn't do it. I would have assumed that he would have, say to his minister, I want a report back every Monday morning at 8:00. Come here with a report and show me, how far down the line you've got. Didn't happen.
Well, there's a clock ticking for these new tariffs. Anything going to happen now? Because you said the channel seems to be open and it seems to be friendlier than it looked, at that press conference.
Well, I've been talking to people in the U.S. administration in Washington, and it's not quite that simple because, in fact, the channels were open. They got the meetings they wanted. They were promised that more would be open. But that doesn't mean that formal trade talks have started. So, I mean, the South African delegation, the cabinet, met with the guy who runs trade negotiations is the U.S. Special Trade Representative, which, as you'd probably know, is a cabinet position in the U.S. And that's Jameson Greer. And they met with Greer, and it was a substantive meeting. They discussed some specific issues. And the South Africans did put some kind of a trade offer on the table.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and then by the end of the White House meeting, they were saying, look, that's a good start, but we need more on this. We need better offers on that. So now I presume the South Africans are looking at that. But it's not yet clear that the Americans are going full bore on it on their side either. So let's see.
John Matisonn, thank you so much.
Thank you.